Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Jacob Allen. He's the managing director of Cicero Impact and has recently completed a months-long project, the Giving State Report. Real incredible insights about better philanthropy. You won't want to miss this episode, so stick around.
Welcome to Your Mark on the World, bringing you another changemaker with champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show, Devin. How are you?
I'm terrific, and it's a thrill to have you. You've been on the show before, and we're really excited today to talk about your new report, The Giving State. This is focused on Utah, but I think so many of the observations and insights you've made in this report are relevant to people all around the country and maybe around the world. What do you think?
I think that's very much the case. Yes, there are some particularities around the context in Utah, but very much Utah shares a lot of things, both good and some challenges in other places. And so I think the lessons do apply broadly.
I should probably acknowledge for the record that I was privileged to serve on the advisory board for this report, and so my fingerprints are on it, but I don't want to claim any credit for it because you did all the hard work, you and your team, with Soraya and Anna and the rest, and kudos to them. Maybe you want to just take a minute and mention who the key players were in the preparation of the report, because I want to make sure we don't miss giving credit where it's due.
Yes, well, so yes, this was a collaboration between two organizations, Cicero Social Impact, with our team here, Anna Smythe and David Smith, and then we partnered with Claritas Consulting, Soraya Toronto of Claritas Consulting, and it was a great collaboration. And then, as you mentioned, we had an advisory board that was pivotal in both the guidance and design of the whole work, and it included a cross-section of leaders and thought partners from around the ecosystem here in Utah in philanthropy, both funders, policymakers, experts, and nonprofit leaders.
Fantastic. Well, what are the key insights from the report that you think are generally applicable, not just to Utah, but across the country, around the world?
So I think one of the things that we see here and elsewhere is clearly there's just this massive desire to do good. And so that's why your show exists, why so many people are involved in all of this work. And that's incredibly laudable and admirable. And then at the same time, there's this interesting mindset that often goes along with that desire, which is that if I'm involved in doing something good, if I'm working hard and I'm serving a good cause, that therefore inevitably good things will happen. And I think we've found in this analysis, and again seen elsewhere, that isn't always the case. That assumption is not always true, unfortunately. And then very often, whether it's funders or whether it's nonprofit leaders, end up doing great things or things they think are going to be great, but don't actually yield ultimate results, meaning changes in the lives of individuals and improvements in communities. And that's the biggest takeaway I think we have, is that mindset needs to change somewhat dramatically, so that we're not just moving money, but we end up moving the needle in terms of outcomes for individuals.
What are some of the things that make Utah peculiar, on the other hand?
So one thing is Utah, the title of the report is The Giving State, and that's because Utahns, on average, give more money and time in service than any other state in the country, in the United States. And so that's unique, and that's been known for quite a while. At the same time, one of the drivers of that is religious giving, and it's not unique to Utah. There's lots of religious giving, and it's known that religiosity is highly correlated with generosity as well. Throughout the country and throughout the world. But that is higher in Utah perhaps than in anywhere else. So that's something that's a little bit unique. As a result, perhaps there are some in the state who believe that too much money goes to churches and religious efforts. And that there's too little money coming to and unpack that whole connection. And one of the things we did find is that for those who give to their churches, they do give on the margins a little bit less to nonprofits than others do. But at the same time, the other side of that coin is that in many cases, almost invariably, churches play a very significant role in providing services and encouraging even greater giving in that ecosystem that plays a role that other more traditional nonprofits might play instead.
One of the other things that the report highlighted was that Utah has I think what the report refers to as a do-it-yourself mentality, certainly an entrepreneurial spirit. How do you think that affects the nonprofits ecosystem in Utah, and what do you recommend that Utahns do to change the ecosystem as a result of that?
So that you're right, that do-it-yourself mentality is a positive. So I don't want to suggest that that's not a good thing. It's a wonderful thing that a lot of Utahns are proud of. And again, everyone sees in many, many places around the world. However, what can happen with that DIY mentality is a couple of things. One is the sense that I'm going to do it, and my way is going to be the right way because I've got a great idea, or I really understand the situation, or I have a unique perspective. And that can lead to a bit of can create some blinders that people put on effectively without looking around and saying, hey, has anybody else done this before? Has anybody else done it differently or better? And what can I learn from them? And so we see a lot of duplication or reinvention of things that have already been demonstrated to be effective or ineffective in other places. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that comes with a DIY mentality, the potential downside is an unwillingness or a disinclination to jump in and work with others. There is a lot of collaboration and coordination that's going on in the state for sure, but there probably could be more. And that could happen, I think, if we said, I want to do it myself, but I want to do it with others, if that makes sense. I want to be engaged, I want to be part of the solution, and it'll be better if I can do it with others, whether on the funding side, if that's an individual funder saying, I'm sure there are other people out there that care about this cause. If we work together, we'll create a greater difference. Or on the nonprofit side of things saying, we know we can't do everything to address complex issues like homelessness or early childhood kindergarten readiness or things like that. And if we work together in coordinated ways, we'll be able to create a greater lift.
I think there are two things I want to follow up on, and I'm going to try and remember to do them both separately, but, small brains, they're frustrating sometimes. But let's focus for a minute on collaboration, because I think that's such an important lesson to take away from this report. What do you think the keys to successful collaboration are?
So first, it's clarity about what we can agree on and who are we trying to help, what is the outcome or the change we're trying to see for that individual or population of individuals. And getting very, very clear and aligned on those things does two things. One, it makes sure that we're all working toward the same goal and there's enough alignment to work together. And two, it's something we can come back to as collaborators if there's discussion or disagreement or questions about how well the collaboration is working or what it should do next. So you can always come back to that anchor point. So that's first. Second, I think, is to think about partnerships must be a win-win situation. So if I'm asked to collaborate with others, I should start thinking about what can I do that will help them achieve their objectives, in addition to simply saying, what can I get out of this as well? So those are two key principles. There are others, holding the collaboration accountable to results, not just to activities, sharing information and data, facilitating coordination. So all of those are really important pieces of it as well. But I think they really you need to have, again, this mindset of we're going to affect change. What is that change we want to achieve? And secondly, how do we work together to achieve mutually purposeful objectives?
The other point I wanted to circle back to is I hate to call it the counter argument, but the concern certainly I had as we were drafting the report. And ultimately, you and others convinced me that this concern is secondary to the conclusion of the report, that the DIY mentality leads sometimes to too many nonprofits doing the same thing redundantly, and not at sufficient scale to be effective. But the other side of that coin is the need for innovation and to get people engaged. And I wonder if you would just talk about that tension for a minute as you had to weigh this thoughtfully as you were drafting the report.
Sure. So you're right. There is the suggestion that everybody should join forces with something that already exists, or at least they shouldn't start something new if something else already exists. Can lead to that question of, wait, should we not? Isn't innovation a good thing? And so I think we do. I would absolutely agree. Innovation is a very important thing, and it's needed more than ever, if you can even say that. It's always needed, but it's needed more than ever in the social sector today, and it's happening faster and faster, and that's all positive. I think what happens, what the concern is when people think they're innovating, but they're not. And that happens when people come up with an idea, start to do some work, but aren't aware of what else is happening. And so I think innovation that adds to, that fills in gaps, that takes things in new directions is fantastic. But innovation that does the same thing that others are doing is not innovation. It's duplication and replication. And that usually is not as productive or efficient as joining forces. If you want to do the same thing, let's join forces and work together.
Yeah, I saw an interesting example of what you're talking about recently, and I'm embarrassed the name of the organization and the individual escapes me, but this fellow had worked in the homeless services sector, homeless youth services sector for some time, and recognized that there really was no one who was taking care of all the young people. I'll call them kids. And ask for forgiveness, but no one was taking care of all the kids that couldn't comply with someone's program, right? The kids that were failing out of all the programs were just on the streets and no one was helping them. So they set up an organization just to help those kids. And so they literally have to go out on the streets in the middle of the night and find these kids and offer them help. And most of the time they turn it down and they have to come back and find them again and offer them help. I mean, It's a painful process, but that seemed to me to be an example of a needed innovation that came about as a result of someone who was really an expert in the space and had thoughtfully, carefully identified a real gap in services and implemented. It wasn't just someone new doing what someone else was doing in maybe a slightly different way.
That's exactly right. And that kind of activity is absolutely essential because there are lots of gaps. Either because resources are constrained, nonprofit, or it's 10 nonprofits can't do a lot, or because is often the case, some nonprofits don't see those blind spots. They aren't aware, they aren't as aware as they could be of the people that are falling out or the people they're not serving, or the fact that they're not getting them as far forward as they would like.
At the same time, you and I both see people all the time who are launching nonprofits and haven't recognized that there are already 3 people doing exactly the same, or 3 organizations doing exactly the same thing that could just desperately need the resources. And the money that goes into spooling up and forming a nonprofit might have fed 1,000 people a meal, or some other equivalent social impact instead of just setting up a new nonprofit. So the redundancy can be very expensive in terms of impact, can't it?
It absolutely can. It absolutely can. It's a drain on the resources that could be going to more effective purposes.
One of the things that I loved about the report is that you came up with a clear, it was a great diagram in the book. I think it's figure 17 in the report, but it's kind of a diagram that shows inputs to impact. And we sometimes use words like outputs, outcomes, and impact almost interchangeably. I've even been guilty of confusing those concepts, but your diagram really helps to distinguish the difference between an output, an outcome, and an impact. And when we really start to distinguish those things, I think our mindset about measurement and what we're really trying to achieve shifts, as it must. Walk us through, if you would, that concept. I think it's on page 38. You probably have the report in your hand.
Maybe you want to make sure I don't mess up the diagram. But so yeah, I would agree with you. I think there has been a lot of discussion about comparing outputs and distinguishing those from outcomes, and yet there is a fair amount of lack of clarity or unawareness of what that really means. So the way we think about it, I'm going to go backwards, if you will. I'm going to start at the end. And I think this process actually is very helpful, is to begin with the end in mind, is to say, what is the impact we want to see? And I think about that in terms of the change that we would like to see in the individual or the community's behavior and status and well-being. And that can be in the form of knowledge or skills or behaviors or socioeconomic standing or opportunities or the like. So to think about that in two fronts. So one is, what is the change that's going to occur that we want to have occur? And two, will we be able to determine that we helped generate that change? We as a nonprofit or I as a funder helped cause that change. And to me, that's the difference between outcomes and impact. Outcomes, again, are the change we see in somebody's life or abilities or opportunities. And impact is the recognition and awareness that something we did led to that outcome, as opposed to the many other things that are happening in the life of an individual or in the community. So again, starting with impact and outcomes in mind, then working backwards and saying, what are the things that need to happen in order for those outcomes to occur, and how do we measure outputs that are likely to lead to those outcomes? So the example might be, if you're helping children, that are under 6 years old, be ready for kindergarten. So there are a variety of metrics and a lot of evidence that says that kindergarten readiness is pivotal and has lifelong implications for education and employment and so on. If that's the case, then what are the things what are the outcomes for pre-K readiness? And it's literacy and numeracy at the very basic level. Could be one of those things. It could be an ability to interact with kids. There are a variety of outcomes. But what are we going to do that leads to those things? And it might be the number of kids we've taught. It might be the number of hours they've spent with educators or interacting with other children or being read to. Those would be indicators that are outputs of our work, but aren't necessarily demonstrating that we've made a change yet. So many organizations count outputs and say that's the impact we're having. And there's a disconnect there. If we say we taught 20 kids this year and that's the measure of our success, well, that's great, and it's possible or even likely that is making a difference for those kids. But we don't know. In many cases, good evaluation work demonstrates that 20 kids in a classroom doesn't necessarily yield readiness for kindergarten. And then if you work backward from there, then it's what are the specific activities that we need to focus on that will lead to those specific outcomes that we're trying to aim for. And if we prioritize social interaction and emotional intelligence as one type of outcome, then that will lead to different activities will be important for that outcome than, say, a different type of outcome, which is literacy and understanding letters and numbers and so on. That will likely require different activities than the social interaction. And then finally, those inputs, what are the capabilities or funding or resources or partnerships or other kinds of things that will be required for us to be successful at driving those activities in a way that yields the outcomes we're looking for.
Perfect. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through that report. Now, Jacob, where can people get this report, and how much do they have to pay to get a copy?
Well, the report's free, so you can download that online. The report is available at www.cicerosocialimpact.org/givingstate.
Now, how do you spell Cicero social impact? Well, social impact we've got. How do you spell Cicero?
Cicero is Cicero. So cicerosocialimpact.org/givingstate. There's a whole page there with a lot of the information as well as the full report that you can download.
And I tried it this morning, and you can just Google the Giving State report, and it won't be the first thing, but you can find it. So in an emergency, that's your backup. But we'll also put a link with the show notes in the YouTube, in the podcast, everywhere we can put the notes. We'll put the notes so you can find that link. But it's really an incredible report. Jacob, I commend you on getting it done, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you, Devin. I appreciate the time to be here with you, and thank you for the help with the report. It was definitely a collaboration with a lot of people providing a lot of input and details. Over 800 people responded to surveys and interviews and so on. So we appreciate everybody who's helping try to move the sector forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Now let's do some good.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded via Google Hangouts on Air and is available at youtube.com/Devin Thorpe. Subscribe to this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes by searching for Your Mark on the World. Every weekday, Devin hosts a CEO, celebrity, entrepreneur, or other changemaker here on the Your Mark on the World show to inspire and prepare you to make your mark. Devin is a champion of social good, writing about, advocating for, and advising people who are doing good. He is a Forbes contributor who is a recognized thought leader in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and crowdfunding. To book Devin as a speaker, visit devinthorpe.com. Learn more about Devin's work at yourmarkontheworld.com.